Hey guys, before I start the story, please like and share to WTF Media and help this video reach out more. Your one like can do the charm for me. On to the story. My name is Otto Klein, self-proclaimed garbage king. As the owner of numerous waste management companies, I have amassed great wealth and power in my industry. My ex-wife, Janet Carson, was a lawyer who had kept her maiden name for professional purposes. Despite our marriage, she seemed more concerned with maintaining her own successful career than being a partner to me. Janet's disdain for my occupation in waste management became apparent once she no longer needed me to finance her expensive law school education. After working as a paralegal for several years, she decided to pursue a law degree, realizing her sharp wit and intellect equaled that of her superiors. Despite my financial success and status as a prominent figure in the business world, Janet began to view me as inferior once she secured a position at a prestigious law firm. As the nights grew later and our sex life dwindled, I couldn't help but feel a heavy weight on my chest. Her increased disrespect towards me was like a sharp knife carving away at our relationship. I knew something was off, and I suspected she had started an affair. It was a painful realization, knowing that as a mortal, I could never compete with the gods she worked with every day in her law firm. But I refused to just roll over and let her take half of my business and wealth in a divorce. No, I needed proof of her infidelity that would hold up in court. After all, if she was sleeping with one of her fellow lawyers, I could probably sue her agency for damages. The thought of making them pay to avoid scandal and the possible loss of clients gave me a glimmer of hope. Perhaps my logic was flawed, but it was all I had to go on at the time. It fueled my actions and kept me going. Every year, Janet's office held a lavish Christmas party, and every year she would invite me as a courtesy. And every year I would decline without hesitation, until this year. When I told her I would be attending, she was shocked and immediately tried to dissuade me. "There won't be anyone there for you to talk to," she argued. "Just a bunch of lawyers bragging about their exorbitant billing hours. Do you really want to subject yourself to that all night?" But I saw through her tactics and stood firm in my decision to attend. This was my chance to gather evidence and protect myself in case things went south in our marriage. I declared, "I don't care as long as I'm with you," but my mind was racing with thoughts of uncovering her secret lover. Janet's eyes flickered with nervousness, a telltale sign that she was keeping something from me. In the days leading up to the party, Janet would constantly suggest excuses I could use to back out, but I was determined to attend. As she got ready on the night of the gala event, she made one last attempt to dissuade me, saying, "I don't want you to have a terrible time. Are you sure you still want to go?" "Yes, my love." I knew her real problem wasn't my appearance. I had been told I was a handsome man with a fit physique, and I was dressed in an Armani suit. No, it was the fact that I worked in garbage disposal, something she found embarrassing. But I always reminded her that she did the same work too. We arrived at the party with the second wave of fashionable latecomers. The room was already buzzing with animated conversations and laughter, but we managed to find an open table near the dance floor, where only one other couple had taken seats so far. Janet and I settled in, and I offered to fetch drinks for us. As I stood in line at the bar, a sharply dressed man who appeared to be one of the lawyers from the firm approached me. "I don't believe we've met before. Who are you here with?" he asked. "My wife, Janet Carson Klein," I replied confidently. "Janet? I didn't realize she was still married," he expressed with surprise. "Yes, we've been happily married for 8 years now. In fact, we just celebrated our 10th anniversary," I stated proudly. The man's expression shifted from shock to amusement as he started laughing, assuming I was joking. But to me, it was no joke. Our love and commitment were real and stronger than ever. It served as a reminder that sometimes truth can be stranger and funnier than fiction. Whispers of the moniker Garbage King followed me like shadow as I mingled among the snobby crowd. Their derisive laughter echoed in my ears, but I simply shrugged it off. After all, I had anticipated this kind of treatment from these elitist types. To them, I was nothing more than low class, if not gutter-level scum. As the evening wore on, I observed my wife, Janet, socializing with various lawyers, paralegals, and their respective spouses or dates. She spoke politely with those seated at our table during the meal, but when the dancing began, I decided to take a chance and ask her to dance. Her expression seemed to reveal that she could barely tolerate being seen with me, but I didn't let it bother me. I tried to assert myself during the slow dances, but soon found myself interrupted by other men cutting in for a chance with Janet. She eagerly accepted each invitation and even managed to sneak in a few fast dances between her slow ones. Giving up on dancing, I leaned back in my seat and watched her closely. About an hour later, a distinguished-looking man in his middle years approached our table. His gaze never left Janet as he asked her to dance, not for permission, but as if he were claiming her for himself. My wife's face lit up when she saw him, and she eagerly stood up, without so much as glancing at me for approval. In that moment, I realized that we may have a winner after all. My entire focus was consumed by their slow dance, the subtle movements and whispers between them hinting at a deeper connection. My gut told me something was going on, but I had no concrete evidence. Was my intuition enough to prove they were lovers? No. But luckily, I had another unique skill at my disposal. I had never disclosed to Janet that I had been recruited straight out of college by the CIA for my uncanny ability to read lips. My training included mastering a complex Middle Eastern dialect, which proved incredibly useful on covert missions. Unfortunately, my time with the agency came to an abrupt end when a notorious whistleblower exposed my identity and that of my entire team. Refusing to be confined to a desk job, I left the organization behind. I stood up from my seat, eager to see what Janet was saying to her dance partner. I shifted my position so I could catch a glimpse of their conversation, but his face remained mostly hidden from my view. This is what I saw. Janet leaned in close to her dance partner, their bodies almost touching as they spoke. Janet, did you get the room for tonight? Hin, room 322, did you put? Janet, yes, I just put it in his drink a few minutes ago. Hin, it shouldn't take long. Janet's hand rested on his chest and she leaned back with a sly smile. Janet, I can't believe you plan for us to make love in the same room my husband is sleeping in. That is so naughty and dangerous. Hin, you love the thrill. Pretend you don't. Janet's laughter tinkled like chimes. She playfully pushed him away. Janet, are you sure he won't wake up too soon? Hin, don't worry. Plenty of time. Are you still nervous? Janet's expression turned serious as she bit her lip. Janet, don't worry about me. If I promised you my ass, you'll get my ass. Oh, Stanley, I am so ready for this. My stomach churned at their conversation. It was clear that Janet and her dance partner had nefarious plans for the night. With a sudden burst of panic, I knocked over my glass, spilling its contents all over myself and the table. Excusing myself quickly, I rushed towards the restrooms, but veered off course towards the exit instead. My heart raced as I hoped that either I hadn't consumed enough of the drug or it wasn't as potent as they thought. Unfortunately, both assumptions proved to be wrong. as my head began to spin and my vision blurred. I stumbled towards the exit, desperate to escape the dangerous situation unfolding before me. The harsh beeping of monitors and the blinding brightness of overhead lights pulled me back to consciousness. The sharp sting of alcohol permeated my nostrils, causing me to cough and squirm in discomfort. Slowly, I pieced together what had happened, a car wreck caused by my own mistake of falling asleep at the wheel on my way home from the party. I surveyed my surroundings and saw a stern-faced nurse standing next to me. Before I could even open my mouth to speak, Janet burst into the room, her eyes wide with concern. All anger and frustration forgotten, I sat up quickly and yelled, "Get that conniving woman out of here!" Without hesitation, Janet fled from the room like a frightened deer. But the adrenaline coursing through my veins would not let me rest. "She's the one who almost got me killed. I demand to speak to a police officer immediately." My words erupted like lava from a volcano, shocking both the nurse and the medical staff. They assumed I was having some sort of psychotic episode. Attempting to calm me down, the nurse placed a hand on my shoulder. But I shook it off angrily and snarled, "Let me make this clear for you. If you do not have a police officer in this room within the next 15 minutes, I will personally sue you and this entire hospital. I know I have been drugged. Run a tox screen for liquid Benadryl and other knockout drugs. My wife and her lover are responsible for almost getting me killed." My voice trembled with rage as I recounted what had transpired before my accident. The lies rolled off my tongue effortlessly as I exaggerated the details of what I knew about the situation. It only took 15 minutes for a police officer to arrive and take my statement, his pen scratching across the paper as he wrote down my claims. I could see the concern in his eyes as I recounted how I had overheard my wife and her lover plotting to drug me and dispose of my body so they could engage in their illicit affair. Of course, I didn't mention that I had heard through lip reading, not wanting to discredit myself. As I sat in the hospital, waiting for my discharge, a nurse came in with the results of the toxicology report, confirming that I had indeed been drugged. The amount of drugs in my system was enough to kill me if I had consumed the full glass. The words "attempted murder" echoed in my head as she spoke. It wasn't long before a police officer was stationed outside my door, and another one came to conduct a more thorough interview. Finally discharged from the hospital, I returned home to find it empty except for all of Janet's belongings scattered about. The police car that passed by regularly served as a constant reminder of the danger that lingered, but at least Janet was not present. Only her possessions remained, taunting me with their presence and reminding me of her betrayal. I was shocked to learn that Janet had been arrested earlier at our house, her lover in tow. They had come to plead with me not to tell the law firm about their planned rendezvous at a hotel. That was the only crime they thought they had committed. But much to their surprise, they were both charged with attempted murder. I could only imagine the look of disbelief on Janet's face as the police slapped handcuffs on her wrists. As expected, the two lawyers refused to speak without legal representation. The district attorney wanted to try them separately, hoping that Janet would turn on her lover and testify against him if she saw that she would likely be convicted. However, his plan failed as the cases were deemed too intertwined and would be tried together. Janet made numerous attempts to contact me before the trial, leaving messages proclaiming her innocence in attempting to take my life. She didn't bother apologizing for her infidelity, perhaps thinking it was irrelevant since she was trying to save herself from prison. But I ignored her pleas and quickly withdrew all funds from our joint accounts, severing any financial ties we had. Her father was forced to foot the bill for her lawyer until he ultimately persuaded me to return her half of the funds. The whole ordeal left a bitter taste in my mouth and a deep sense of betrayal in my heart. I couldn't believe the person I loved and trusted had plotted against me in such a cruel and calculating manner. As I sat in the courtroom, awaiting justice for the attempted murder of myself, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction knowing that Janet would finally face consequences for her actions. The courtroom was hushed as I took the stand, surrounded by my legal team and a team of forensic experts. The toxicology report sat in front of me, a damning piece of evidence that would make or break this case. The drug in my system had been expertly identified by a chemist, his knowledge on poisonings, knockout drugs, and date rape drugs, providing irrefutable proof of what had happened to me. As the star witness, all eyes were on me and my testimony. But the defense had their own agenda. They questioned the validity of my lip-reading abilities. How could I possibly be so sure of what I saw when most people who can read lips only perform at barely above 50% accuracy? They brought in expert witnesses to discredit me, but I had the backing of several CIA staff members who testified to my above average abilities. And to further prove my skill, I even gave a demonstration in court. But the defense's attorney was not satisfied. They presented an outrageous theory that I had actually drugged myself in order to frame my wife and her lover for attempted murder. Their motive? To secure all the assets in our divorce and receive a hefty settlement from a lawsuit against their law firm. In reality, I wish I were capable of such cunning actions. But the judge was not swayed by their outlandish claims, and neither was I, as I openly expressed my disbelief and disdain for their accusation in open court. During the defense's turn, Janet and Stanley chose not to testify. Instead, they had a forensic chemist take the stand, testifying that the drug in my system would likely not have been enough to kill me. They also brought in a sign language expert who spoke about the overall inaccuracy of lip reading. I couldn't help but smile as my lawyer asked him if some lip readers were more accurate than others. The expert confidently replied, of course. But then he was asked if he had ever seen me before to determine my accuracy. He had to admit that he hadn't. The only other witness was Sergeant Haskins, a police officer who had interviewed the people at our table during the party. He testified that none of them reported seeing Janet put anything in my drink. And with that, the defense rested their case. Their conclusion: no one saw Stanley give Janet any powder, no one saw her put anything in my drink, and there was simply no solid proof that I hadn't done it to myself. It all came down to their word against mine. The courtroom was tense as the police officer finished testifying, his words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. But suddenly, an elderly woman in the gallery began to clamor for the district attorney's attention. Her frail voice rose above the hushed whispers, causing a disruption in the proceedings. The district attorney, growing annoyed with the interruption, sent an assistant to address the woman. After a quick exchange, the assistant returned and exclaimed, "Recess now." The district attorney requested and was granted a 15-minute break as he hurried to speak with the old lady. I glanced over at Janet, who looked horrified at seeing the woman. She immediately turned to her lawyer and engaged in a strained conversation with him. When court resumed, the district attorney made a surprising request for a rebuttal witness to testify. This sparked confusion as to whose testimony was being challenged. Janet leaned over to her lawyer, urging him to speak up. "Your Honor," he addressed the judge, "I am requesting another recess, in which time I will be presenting a change in plea by my client." Stanley and his lawyer erupted in anger and frustration, their voices laced with profanity and insults towards Janet. The tension in the room reached its peak before finally subsiding during the second recess of the day. In the dimly lit conference room, Janet and her lawyer sat across from the stern-faced district attorney. After much negotiation, they had reached an agreement, a guilty plea and a 3 5-year sentence in exchange for Janet's testimony against Stanley. The district attorney's expression softened slightly as he nodded in approval. The frail old lady had been brought in to speak with the district attorney earlier. She had recounted the night she witnessed Janet slipping something into my drink at the bar. When the police officer asked her if it was knockout powder, she hesitated before ultimately saying no, thinking it was just hangover medicine. But now, with this plea deal on the table, the truth was finally coming to light. Months went by before Janet's guilty plea and sentence were announced. In the meantime, Stanley was granted a new trial in which Janet would be the key witness. She bravely took the stand and detailed how Stanley had pursued her and manipulated her into starting their affair. She swore that all she wanted was to humiliate me, but Stanley had taken things too far by deliberately giving me a lethal dose of the drug. However, Stanley argued that everything he did was at Janet's request and that she knew exactly what she was doing when she administered the fatal amount of medication. Stanley's lawyer proposed a new theory, one that sent shivers down my spine. Janet had seduced him and masterminded a plan to frame Stanley and eliminate me. She saw an opportunity to be rid of her husband with his impending inheritance and also get rid of her lover, whose position as a junior partner could potentially go to her. However, my car crash threw a wrench in her carefully laid out scheme. As Stanley cried at the thought of being capable of harming another human being, the jury was convinced by Janet's manipulation and lies. He was ultimately convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. I was given the chance to testify at his sentencing hearing, my heart heavy with grief and anger. With tears streaming down my face, I spoke out against their evil deeds. I should not be standing here today. I should be buried in a grave in Riverside Cemetery. Instead, my wife's lover should be standing beside my grave, celebrating their successful disposal of the garbage man. She should have inherited a fortune while they lived off of my hard-earned money, spending it on their twisted desires. Make no mistake, neither of them is upset that I almost died. They are only upset that I didn't die and they were caught. My voice shook with emotion as I finished my testimony, the weight of betrayal and deception heavy on my shoulders. My special talent for lip reading saved my life that day. I had already consumed a quarter of the drink my wife had spiked with drugs from her lover when I noticed something was off. The liquid swirled with a dark, murky cloud, and the faint smell of chemicals hovered in the air. My suspicions were confirmed when tests revealed a potentially lethal dose of drugs in my system. The effects of the drugs caused me to lose consciousness behind the wheel, sending my car careening into nearby bushes. If it weren't for the sturdy tree that stood just inches away, I would surely be dead. But even as I lay there, fading in and out of consciousness, I couldn't help but feel grateful that I wasn't dead and grateful that I had discovered my wife's treachery before it was too late. In court, both my wife and her lover claimed that they only intended to drug and humiliate me. They insisted that my wife had mistakenly given me an overdose instead of a milder dose as planned. But even if that were true, could their careless actions simply be brushed aside? As they were dragged away after receiving their sentences, 10 to 15 years for Stanley and 3 to 5 years for Janet, she cried out to me, begging for forgiveness. But all I could do was stare at her coldly and mouth the words read my lips, "I don't care." Because in that moment, Nothing mattered to me except for the fact that I was supposed to be 6 feet under, yet here I was, alive and free. Justice had been served, and now it was time for me to move on and leave behind the toxic deceit of my former marriage. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly easy. With Janet in jail and too ashamed to contest anything, I was able to walk away with all the assets from our failed marriage. And after some heated negotiations with the law firm and Stanley, I also received a hefty sum from the lawsuit settlements. As someone in the waste management business, I couldn't help but joke that I had become filthy rich. In the aftermath of the trial, there was no shortage of women vying for the now vacant title of Garbage Queen. The irony was not lost on me as I watched them try to win my favor. But none of them were female lawyers, a profession that seemed to be lacking in interest for this particular title. Looking back, it's amazing how much my life has changed since the day Janet tried to kill me. But now, as I sit in my luxurious mansion, surrounded by all my wealth, I can't help but feel grateful for how things turned out. Sometimes good things do come out of bad situations. And as they say, one man's trash is another man's treasure.